Winter covered England in a thick silence. Inside a forgotten priory on the edge of the Cotswolds, a fire burned weakly, its light crawling across the stone walls like the last breath of a dying age. An old woman sat beside it, her face hidden beneath a hood, her thin hand open to the warmth. Outside, the villagers whispered her name with fear and fascination. They said she had once ruled England. They said she had devoured a king. Her name was Isabella of France. The world remembered her as the she-wolf. They said she slept with beasts. Yet no one ever asked who the real beasts were. The wind pressed against the windows. She raised her head slowly. The fire caught her eyes, still sharp, still dangerous. In that glow, she no longer saw the frail woman she had become, but the girl she once was. A child bride wrapped in silk and duty, sent from Paris to London to seal peace between two thrones that had never known peace. The vision unfolded before her. A cathedral filled with banners, bells ringing, a young king waiting at the altar, his face carved in stone. The bride walked toward him, her hands trembling beneath the veil, and behind the king stood another man, watching her with quiet disdain. His name was Piers Gaveston. He would soon own the king's heart more completely than any queen ever could. They called Isabella cruel, adulterous, vengeful, but cruelty was the language of kings, and vengeance the crown of the unloved. The fire flared. Her face glowed in the shifting light. She leaned closer to the flames and whispered to the empty room, to the ghosts that refused to leave her. "They made me a monster," she said softly. "But monsters are born from cages, not from hearts." The sound of distant bells echoed through the night. The flames dimmed until only her eyes remained. 2 points of light in the dark. Stay with us and subscribe to our channel as we uncover the forbidden rise of Isabella of France, the queen who learned to survive among beasts. The marriage of Isabella of France and Edward II began with the illusion of peace. She was 12 years old, dressed in white silk, her face pale beneath the crown that felt too heavy for her small head. Edward II was 24, already hardened by the weight of rule, his pride shaped by years of conflict and fear of weakness. Their wedding at Westminster was meant to unite two kingdoms long divided by blood and war. Golden banners waved above their heads, and the people shouted blessings that echoed like hollow prayers. To England, Isabella of France was the Pearl of Paris, a royal bride sent to heal the wounds between nations. Edward greeted her with formality, his words gentle but distant, his eyes drifting toward someone else. During banquets, Isabella sat beside her husband, smiling as duty demanded. Yet the warmth she longed for never came. Her youth was spent in silence, studying every glance and gesture, slowly realizing that affection was not part of her marriage. At the heart of the court stood Piers Gaveston, a man of daring charm and arrogance. He was not of noble birth, but Edward II called him brother, showered him with gifts, and placed him beside the throne. In the eyes of the king, Gaveston was irreplaceable. Isabella watched the bond between them with growing unease. She saw how her husband's laughter belonged to another, how his loyalty bent toward love that dared not speak its name. The whispers grew louder. The child bride from France, they said, had married not a king, but a man already possessed. As months turned to years, Isabella changed. She learned the language of politics, of survival, of silence. The nobles began to rebel against Gaveston's insolence. They accused him of corruption and betrayal, of using the king as his shield. Edward II fought for him until rebellion forced the crown to yield. Gaveston was captured and executed by the barons. His death tore through the kingdom like a storm. Edward II wept for his lost companion and withdrew from the world. The palace turned cold and suspicious. Isabella did not weep. She felt no triumph, only clarity. The man who had stolen her husband's heart was gone. Yet the emptiness he left behind was worse than before. Now she understood the true language of the English crown. It was not spoken in vows or in love, but in control, patience, and power. She wrote to her father in Paris, promising loyalty but concealing her despair. She began to listen, to wait, to remember every slight that had humiliated her. When the first snow fell that winter, the child from France had vanished. In her place stood a young queen whose silence had become sharper than any sword. Isabella of France had learned that in a kingdom ruled by desire, survival demanded a heart made of ice. The death of Piers Gaveston did not bring peace to the marriage of Isabella of France and Edward II. It only opened a deeper wound in the heart of the king, out of his grief. Another man rose to power, more ruthless and cunning than the last. His name was Hugh Despenser the Younger. Where Gaveston had charmed, Despenser commanded. He whispered into the king's ear and ruled through his weakness. Despenser seized lands, imprisoned nobles, and stripped the queen of her authority. Isabella found her jewels taken, her servants dismissed, her letters intercepted. Her chambers were watched day and night by Despenser's men. The court that had once bowed before her now averted their eyes. Every gesture, every breath she took was measured against suspicion. Edward II no longer sought his queen's counsel. He had found comfort in cruelty. Despenser fed him with fear, convincing him that rebellion lurked in every corner, that even his wife plotted against him. The king obeyed, blinded by loyalty to a man who used him as a weapon. One evening, during a royal feast, Isabella of France stood beside her husband as the lords and ladies drank to the health of the crown. Despenser mocked her in front of them, calling her the Frenchwoman who had brought only misfortune to England. The laughter that followed felt like knives against her skin. Edward said nothing. He raised his cup, and the humiliation was complete. In the years that followed, England fell into misery. Taxes crushed the poor. Nobles fled the court, and famine spread across the land. Isabella walked through the corridors of the palace as if through a graveyard. She saw the people starving outside the walls, yet the king and Despenser feasted as if the world were not burning. When her brother, Charles V of France, became king, Isabella saw a narrow road toward freedom. Edward, desperate for peace with France, sent her there as his messenger. It was meant as a temporary mission, but she knew it was her escape. In Paris, she was received not as a fallen queen, but as a royal daughter returned home. For the first time in years, she breathed without fear, yet her thoughts remained with the kingdom she had left behind, and with the rage that had been growing in silence. Among the exiles at the French court, she met Roger Mortimer, a man who had once defied Edward II and paid for it with imprisonment and loss. He carried the same hatred she did. In their shared bitterness, something darker was born. It was not love, not yet. It was recognition. Two wounded souls seeing themselves mirrored in each other. As winter approached, Isabella looked out over the Seine, her reflection trembling on the water. Behind her, the bells of Notre Dame tolled across the city. She whispered to herself that she would return to England, not as a queen abandoned, but as a storm that would sweep away those who had caged her. That night, The child who had once crossed the sea in silk and innocence began to die, and the woman who would one day overthrow a king began to awaken. Years passed in silence while England decayed under the rule of Edward II. From across the Channel, Isabella of France watched the kingdom that had once rejected her fall deeper into fear and famine. Every report that reached the French court carried the same message. The people were starving, the nobles divided, and the king's cruelty had become his only language. In those quiet years, the queen planned. Isabella understood that revenge without patience was ruin. She studied the politics of Europe, won the trust of foreign merchants, and whispered promises into the right ears. Her letters moved through hidden hands, crossing borders like shadows. No longer a wife pleading for dignity, she had become a strategist shaping the fall of a dynasty. She lived under the protection of her brother, King Charles V, who hesitated to involve France in her cause. Isabella never pressed him. She knew that power grows faster in silence than in demand. Instead, she built her alliances with outcasts and mercenaries, English exiles, Flemish captains, and loyal men who remembered the mercy she once showed them as queen. Gold came from quiet sources, weapons from the docks of Bruges, ships from merchants who cared more for profit than allegiance. Her closest ally, Roger Mortimer, remained beside her. Yet what bound them was not affection, but shared exile, a mutual hunger to reclaim what had been stolen from them both. They spoke of strategy rather than love, of routes, supplies, and loyal barons waiting for their signal. Between them stood an understanding colder and stronger than romance. By the summer of 1326, the pieces were ready. Isabella disguised her preparations as a pilgrimage, a gesture of faith that concealed a campaign of war. When the fleet gathered off the coast of Normandy, she walked among the soldiers dressed not as a queen, but as a commander. The men called her the Lady of the North Wind. They said her calmness before the storm gave them courage. The crossing was hard. Autumn rains turned the sea to glass and steel. Yet Isabella stood at the prow of the ship, her veil snapping in the wind. She thought of the girl she had once been, the bride sent to heal 2 kingdoms, and how that innocence had been buried under years of humiliation. She whispered to the dark waves that she was coming home, not to forgive, but to reclaim. When they reached the coast of Suffolk, the land was gray and silent. No army opposed them. Instead, farmers and fishermen came forward with food and oaths of loyalty. Word spread like fire through wet grass. The queen had returned. The people who had suffered under Edward II's rule now marched in her name. That night, standing on English soil once more, Isabella looked toward the distant glow of London. Behind her, the wind carried the sound of the sea like a heartbeat. She knew there was no turning back. The kingdom that had once imprisoned her would soon kneel before her silence. The capture of Edward II ended the war, but not the darkness. England lay quiet beneath the ashes of rebellion. In the halls of Nottingham and the towers of London, the air carried the sound of chains and prayers that went unanswered. The king who had once ruled by pride now sat alone in a cell, stripped of crown, servants, and dignity. No throne, no banners, no voice to command, only silence. Isabella had returned not as wife but as ruler. Her son, the young Prince Edward, was crowned to secure the line, yet everyone knew whose hand truly guided the realm. She moved through the royal chambers with calm precision, listening more than she spoke. Those who had once mocked her now bowed so low their foreheads touched the floor. Her power was clean, deliberate, and cold. Edward II was moved from castle to castle, his guards chosen with care to keep him unseen. The official letters said he lived in comfort, that the Queen had shown mercy. But mercy was a word too fragile for the world they had made. At Berkeley Castle, the walls were thick enough to hold any secret. There, the fallen king waited, unaware of which night would be his last. The court spoke in whispers. Some claimed Isabella ordered nothing, that her silence was command enough. Others swore she turned her eyes away, leaving the act to men who understood her unspoken wish. One autumn night, as the fog settled over the hills, a cry echoed from the depths of the castle. No one dared to move until it was over. At dawn, a messenger rode to the Queen. His face was pale, his voice shaking as he delivered the news. The former king had died during the night. The cause, they said, was grief. Isabella of France dismissed the man without a word. She walked to the window and looked toward the gray horizon where the sun had not yet broken through. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment her reflection in the glass looked almost young again, almost at peace. Yet peace never truly followed her. England was hers, but it was a kingdom built on ghosts. Each decision she made was followed by the echo of that cry from Berkeley. The people called her savior, then witch, then queen again. None of it mattered. The throne was steady, and silence was her crown. Roger Mortimer stood beside her through the months that followed, his presence growing heavier, his confidence turning to arrogance. He began to speak in her place, to sign decrees in his own hand. The nobles whispered that the Queen had replaced one tyrant with another. Isabella of France heard the whispers and felt the chill of prophecy. The death of Edward II had freed her, but freedom, she now saw, was only another kind of cage. The power she had fought for so long had changed its shape, and its chains were once again around her wrist. The years that followed Isabella of France's triumph did not bring her peace. Victory had silenced her enemies, yet it also silenced her sleep. In the quiet hours before dawn, she would wake to the sound of her own breath, cold and steady, as if she were listening for a voice that never came. Power, once bright as flame, had turned to smoke. It filled her lungs until she could no longer tell whether she ruled or merely breathed what power left behind. England called her by many names. Some praised her as the woman who saved the kingdom from ruin. Others whispered that she had done so through dark bargains, that she had traded her soul for dominion. Ballads turned to warnings. In taverns, men spoke of the queen who slept with beasts, not for lust, but for the hunger that no crown could satisfy. The myth of her cruelty grew larger than the truth, until even she began to wonder what she had become. Isabella of France no longer visited the great halls. The sound of celebration sickened her. She spent her days in smaller rooms, writing letters she would never send, touching the royal seal but never pressing it to wax. The ink stained her fingers like ash. Outside her window, the gardens she had once loved lay tangled and unkept, their fountains dry. The courtiers avoided her gaze. They feared the stillness in her eyes more than her commands. Servants spoke her name only in prayer. She moved like a shadow through corridors lined with portraits of kings who had ruled before her. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her, judging, forgiving nothing. At times, she would order the mirrors covered, unable to face her reflection. On rare nights when she looked, she saw a face too calm for the storm that lived inside. The world called her she-wolf, Yet what she saw was not a predator, but a survivor whose hunger had turned inward. The beasts they accused her of lying with were not men. They were memories, regrets, and the gnawing certainty that victory had devoured what remained of her soul. The church demanded repentance. The nobles demanded mercy. Isabella of France gave neither. She spoke little, smiled less, and when she did, her lips trembled as if remembering something too heavy to forget. Time moved slowly within the walls of her solitude. Seasons passed without color. The woman who had once commanded armies now could not command her own heart. She understood that every crown hides a wound, and hers bled in silence. In the evenings, she walked through the courtyard alone, her steps echoing against the stone. The torches flickered, throwing her shadow long across the walls. To those who saw her, she was the queen who had conquered beasts. But in truth, she was the last of them, wandering her own kingdom like a ghost searching for forgiveness that history would never give. In her final years, Isabella of France lived in a quiet estate far from the noise of London. The courtiers no longer came, the letters no longer arrived, and the sound of bells no longer followed her name. The crown that had once burned on her head was gone, replaced by a simple veil of mourning. Yet in the silence that surrounded her, she seemed more powerful than ever, as if solitude had become her throne. The servants who remained spoke of her strange calm. Each morning she walked through the gardens before sunrise, tracing the frozen paths with bare hands. She never looked toward the city. She watched the horizon instead, as if expecting the sea to return what it had once taken. She spoke rarely, but sometimes her words drifted through the corridors like prayer. She said that peace was not forgiveness, that silence was not defeat. Time softened her voice, but not her memory. She no longer dreamed of power or war, only of faces she could not forget. The laughter of her son as a child, the echo of oaths broken long ago, the smell of rain on the night she first left France. All of them returned in fragments, gentle and cruel, until memory itself felt like a punishment. When death came, it was said she faced it sitting upright beside the window, the light of dawn falling over her face. In her lap lay a white garment stitched with a single wolf in silver thread. Some claimed she smiled. Others said her eyes remained open, fixed on the horizon she had watched every morning. The chronicles wrote that she was buried in the habit of a nun, her jewels left behind, her grave unmarked. But legends lingered. They said that when the wind passed through the ruins of her garden, it carried the cry of a wolf, low and mournful, fading into prayer. History remembers her as a warning, yet her silence endures like stone. The woman they called the she-wolf had only wanted to live as more than a shadow. If the walls of the past could speak, they would whisper her name still. Stay with us and uncover the forgotten voices buried beneath the crowns. Subscribe to our channel, where history remembers what power tried to erase.